Hello, I'm Melanie Murcott. I'm an associate professor at the University of Cape Town at the Institute of Marine and Environmental Law, where I'm running a project on the SDGs at work with Matteo Famiglia, who is an assistant professor of climate law and governance at the University of Amsterdam and a voluntary scientific fellow of Hasselt University in their Faculty of Law. And today I'm here with Dr. Elvis Fokala, who is the manager of the Children's Rights Unit at the Centre for Human Rights, University of Pretoria in South Africa. Now, Matteo and I are looking at how the UN Sustainable Development Goals work, and we're doing that today with Elvis. Specifically, we're looking with reference to how governance actors in Europe and Africa are playing a role in implementing the SDGs, either deliberately or inadvertently, including actors such as the courts, municipalities, children, international bodies, and corporations. Our aim is to foster North-South dialogue among lawyers, policymakers, and academics, and others on the significance of the SDGs as governance tools in a time of climate change. We want to generate innovative responses to climate change and its many human rights implications. We're doing so with thanks to a Flemish Inter-University Council UOS program through Hasselt University in Belgium, which supports partnerships between Flemish universities and universities in the Global South, such as the University of Cape Town and the University of Pretoria. Today, we're here with Elvis, who will talk to us about the role of children in Africa in implementing the SDGs in a time of climate change. Elvis, our first question for you is, what is the role that you see for children in Africa when it comes to implementing the SDGs, particularly in response to climate change?
Thanks for the question. What I see is that already in the field, children are very much active already seeing to it that at least the SDGs have met in their various countries. But importantly, in the continent, I see children playing three major roles. One, as actors, two, as activists, and three, as researchers. As actors, children could, carry on or demand to themselves to actually ensure that this development goals are implemented. And one example that I can give is that children can also play the role of becoming, promoters of climate or green energy or what happens in their various countries. But as activists, children can also play the role of those who promote and ensure that these SDGs are implemented. In other words, they could hold government accountable in that sense, in the sense that they require from them more or less whenever they meet them to see the extent to which they have been able to implement or to at least make an effort to attain the SDGs. Children in Africa as well can also act as researchers. Now, unlike the first two, this is very much unlikely because we've not really interacted a lot with literature produced by children in the continent that speaks to the SDGs. But if you look at it carefully at the growing level of literacy that we have in the continent and the extent to which children are now interacting with text and how they also try to show their skills of writing, you could as well say that children can act as researchers. And as researchers, they could be able either to produce a documentary on some of these issues or also produce text that could be read by adults in different forums. And they could also be poets on these issues where they could, in a way, verbalize some of the things that concerns them in terms of the liturgic approaches that state parties or member states have adopted to implement all the SDGs. So for me, it is just three roles, those very good three roles that I think one as actors or as activists or as researchers themselves or collaborate in their research to implement the SDGs.
Great. And I think one of the ways children could share their research on the SDGs, and indeed they are doing so, is of course through social media. And we see young people using that method of sharing ideas very effectively on climate change issues.
Absolutely. And that is where the documentary part of research now comes into play, where you find the creative, angle of children's mindset, how it plays out on social media. You and I know very well that they have a perfect mastery of these social media platforms that we do not have. And for that, if they use their creative set of skills, they are able to also exemplify or at least show to the extent to which some of these SDGs could be implemented in state, and we have seen that, and we like to encourage it.
Brilliant. And Elvis, could you tell us, do you think the SDGs play a central or peripheral or marginal role in implementation and climate activism by students, so by young people, sorry, and are they deliberately or inadvertently implemented by children? So are children going out there and obviously and intentionally drawing on the SDGs, or the SDGs something that are not at the forefront of their minds?
So within the SDGs 17 that I number, some, in my opinion, are central and some are peripheral in nature. The ones that are central are the ones that speak directly to children's well-being. And you could, for example, look at SDG 16 that speaks to peace, justice, and the strong institutions. Those speak to children in Africa, especially those who live in the war zones, or at least in countries that are continuously inflicted by a conflict or civil war. Then you also have SDG 14 that speaks to life and or life below water. Now here we're looking at aquatic, animals or the fish and all whatnot. These are things that you don't consume in order to have protein. So these are all things that play a central role. But from a more peripheral perspective, you could look at aspects that do not directly, affect children. So there's a direct impact of the SDGs on children's well-being, and there's an indirect impact on children's well-being. The direct ones play a central role, and the indirect ones play the peripheral role. And that is where you could then, pick on issues about decent work. Now, decent work do play a peripheral role because the children generally at a certain age are not allowed to engage in work that would, so that comes indirectly through their guardians or through their parents. So that for me is the peripheral aspect of what plays out. And then you also have in the situation of children, advocating either for the attainment of the SDGs. First, the SDGs for me, they set goals that different aspects, and I could speak closer to home, different aspects of human rights or different angles of human rights that we try to protect, how we attain, the satisfactory end of those human rights. We can attain them, one, by ensuring that we at least tick one of the SDGs. Children do not, in most cases, intentionally advocate for the SDGs, and especially in the rural areas in the continent, because those children are not really exposed to the text or the knowledge even of what the SDGs are. But you will find some schools in the urban areas where children are very much aware of the content of the SDGs, and they have actually gone further to study the extent to which some of the SDGs, affect their well-being. And one of them, which is very prominent now in the continent, is SDG 13. And I speak to this because as of last week, we were in Zambia and we came back on Sunday the 26th or 27th, I think, of May 2024. So when we engaged the children in Zambia, what we picked up is that the issue of climate change or climate action is something that they have been studying in school. And these are children around the Lusaka area that they've been studying in school. So for that, you see that these children are already advocating for this. We had a brilliant presentation from a student who spoke about how Zambia could overcome the drought that the country is currently facing now. They spoke about the wind, the wind energy and all whatnot. That for me was telling, to the extent that even though they could, verbalize these issues, some of them do it intentionally and some do it inadvertently.
Yeah.
Just because the bottom line is that the well-being of a child is central to a child's smile.
That's amazing. It's very inspiring to hear what children are doing. And of course, a starting point for why children are particularly relevant actors in the implementation of SDGs is because climate change will affect children more than those of us who are older and who have benefited from the destruction
Absolutely.
of the
Absolutely.
environment.
And you could, as I said, you could not tag that to the climate-induced flooding that Kenya just experienced. And that swept away so many people, including children. And you can also tag it to what I just gave as an example of the climate-induced drought that Zambia is facing for the first time. In fact, that country for the first time has run out of maize, which used to be their stable food provider. And the government seemingly has run out of options on how to mitigate the drought. But you could hear children, as I said, we met with some children there, but you could hear them offering solutions of things that could be done. This could come, one, from books that they've read, two, from what they've watched on social media, and what they understand to be these different sources of energy that could help, reduce the impact of drought.
Brilliant. So you've mentioned a little bit about this already, but could you tell us, are there particular SDGs, just very briefly, that you think are especially important for children and why that's so?
So I'm going to speak to that in a more or less, I'll pick three, and I'll start with SDG 3, which is good health and well-being. That's the first one. The fourth SDG as well, on quality education, as the second one. And then we have clean water and sanitation, SDG number 6. And then, of course, as I mentioned, climate and all whatnot, all those other ones. But you could, for these three that I have mentioned, you will see that they play a central role in children's socioeconomic rights, or they play a central role in the rights that really benefit children. We can't really link a lot more to civil and political rights, of course, to an extent where we see freedom of expression, freedom of association, that we can link children to that. But voting and all whatnot does not really impact them. But their socioeconomic well-being is something that children cherish enough. And quality education is what we desperately need in this continent, Africa. And I find that central, as a central SDG, that speaks a lot more to the well-being of children, and of course their health as well, and then water and sanitation. I just want to make a little bit of emphasis on the issue of water and sanitation, and this is based on a study that one of my students is currently doing on the issue of menstrual poverty and the lack of sanitary distribution in a rural school. Now, it is still very prominent in the continent, and such an SDG, attaining such a goal, will definitely, alleviate that issue of menstrual poverty in our schools, to make sure that there are sanitary pads that are distributed constantly, and also that there's some kind of education that goes on into that process, in how a young girl or a girl child could take care of themselves. So I find that particular SDG 6 extremely central. But that SDG cannot be implemented if SDG 4 on quality education is not carried out, because quality education includes positive education around menstrual management. That would not also be implemented, 6 that is, if SDG 3 is not implemented, because it speaks to good health as well. And that as well will not be implemented if we look at the other SDGs that play out. For example, the issue of reduced inequalities. If that is not also implemented, I mean, the three that I spotted will not also be effectively implemented. So you will see that in the long run, there is a chain that binds some of these central SDGs that speak to children in a way that the chain can't be broken. Yeah. They just all have to be implemented in order to meet that satisfactory end of ensuring children's well-being.
That's brilliant. You've explained it so beautifully. I really like the idea that girl children need both sanitation and education to benefit from good health and well-being relating to their menstrual health. It's a very important issue. Thank you. And then this is more of a legal question. So legally speaking, we know as lawyers that the SDGs are soft law, which means they're not binding, but inform policy development and implementation, including in hard law. Whereas in contrast, hard laws impose binding obligations. And so for children in Africa, as far as they are concerned, could the SDGs play or a hard or soft law kind of role?
I think they can play both roles, both hard and soft. Hard in the sense that if they are phrased and coined in a head of argument more as rights, they're phrased in that sense, where they are linked to substantive rights in binding instruments, either the International Covenant when it comes to cultural rights or the Convention on Rights of the Child and the African Children's Charter, that both of these instruments actually have a lot of if I may say, the genetics or genes of SDG that flows through them, especially the socioeconomic components. But so if they coin it, the heads of arguments are coined in the way that it speaks to the right aspects of these treaties that I've mentioned, then that will be, the hard approach or the hard role that it will play in order to claim. The soft approach would when you link it to sustainability, human sustainability. And the fact that the failure of respecting a particular right or protecting a particular right could lead to some form of disease spread or another pandemic that could be worse than what we experienced in 2020 or 2021, COVID-19 that is. So for me, I find it important that for one to claim them in a court process, there is need to make reference, to a sister or family rights or rights that relate to particular SDGs in binding instruments, the Constitution, the treaties, and if states have ratified those, the national acts or the charters that states might have at national level that's relate to children. If it's done that way, then the law has a strong role to play in order to claim the SDGs. But in the same breath, you can also combine both the hard and the soft. The soft being the fact that you now highlight the soft more as the consequential issue, that it becomes a consequence if this right is not, implemented properly or protected properly, then the consequence would be this. The consequence would be shortage of water, poor sanitation, poor health, poor education, which are for central to the SDGs.
Yeah, I think you've linked up hard and soft law instruments in a very interesting way. That's really helpful for our listeners. Then our very last question for you, Elvis, all the insights you shared have been so valuable. We want to get a sense from you of what is the value of North-South dialogue when it comes to engaging on the implementation of the SDGs. Now, you and I are both South scholars, so we're currently engaging in South-South dialogue. But you know that our project on the SDGs at work looks at engaging in a North-South way, so with communities and scholars and activists and so on working in the global North, and we want to hear your thoughts on the value of this.
I think you and I, given that we are both in the South, we are quite clear on the fact that when it comes to emissions, that we in the South, we don't produce as much as those in the North do because they are more industrialized than we are. But at the same time, with the impact of what that those emissions do, we have it more. We have the impact of it more than they do because they would have done something, to protect themselves, so they protect their ozone layer from that. So for me, that is a lesson already. It is a matter of cross-learning, some kind of examples that we can also pick up from them. They are not perfect. They also have their own issues. And if you speak about generating energy, they still use coal. Some of the countries there in the North still use coal. And we still use coal as well in the global South. So in that sense, we've both identified coal, as negative, in that space if you look at clean energy. So in that sense, we can both cross-learn to see how we eradicate the use of coal and go into solar energy or whatever that we find that is affordable to the different sides of the continent. But for me, it is one, cross-learning, cross-learning of best practices from both ends. And I think we stand to learn more from what some of the countries in the North have enacted or they've adopted as climate policies. That's one. The second one that I also see a lot is climate education. it is not very strong in the global south as it is in the global north. I mean, it is telling from the number of cases that have been in front of the European Court or even in front of the of the UN Children's Committee. It is something to say that we haven't really had a case, at the AU level either on the SDGs or on climate or any of those SDGs that play out in that space. But so given that the North has already has some groundwork put in place, I see us learning a lot in the aspect of litigation, where they can learn from us, and I think they have already in some instance, is that in our rural settings, we still have a lot of greenery, a lot of greenery, a lot of reserves that we would really like to preserve, and maybe in a way avoid the industrial countries from buying our wood. That they should leave our wood, for us to preserve our environment in that sense. But for me, that's what I see as a lesson that we can cross-learn from each other. There is need for the dialogue. We need to talk. We need to cooperate. And for me, this project is a perfect example of the work that needs to be done either in the diplomatic space or in the social space. And here we are doing it more in an academic space. And I find it very exciting.
Thank you, Elvis, for your time and your insights on the SDGs. For more on Elvis's work and the work of other members of our project team, you can check out our forthcoming book on the SDGs at work, which will have North and South insights on how the SDGs are being implemented as governance tools in a time of climate crisis. This has been the SDGs at work. Thank you.
Thank you.